Hello, welcome to our 8th lesson in our series on religion, peace and conflict. My name is Mr. Wood and today we're talking about weapons of mass destruction. Our objectives today are to know about different types of weapons of mass destruction and to understand the possible implications of using them. We're going to consider whether they can ever be justified. You need to know the WMDs have the potential to obliterate the entire human race and planet Earth. Whilst no religious people agree with their use, some see their existence as a necessary evil to deter countries from going to war. Let's dive on in. I want to know if you can tell me what these three things have in common. The wheel, email, and the watch. You might want to pause the video for a minute while you think about that, or you might want the answer straight away. The truth is that these are all inventions that changed the world. That's right. The wheel, one of the earliest inventions we know about, made transportation of heavy things a lot easier. Email changed the way we communicate around the whole world. It's instant. You can get a reply instantly. You know if the other person has received it. This unprecedented change came from this, and you can read up about that for yourself. The watch meant that we could, well, not control time, but we could measure time, which meant that the whole nature of work changed when the watch was invented. Three inventions that really, really changed the world. And we're looking at another one today. If we look back at the history of warfare, things have changed a lot. Back in the day, you would look at the person you were fighting pretty close, you'd see them and you'd be involved in the fight with them. It would be your life and their life on the lines. You'd have limited weaponry, but you'd be at it kind of together. As warfare changed, as more different technology came out, we can see a picture here from World War II. It's not an actual picture, but it's a fabrication of a moment in World War II, where troops were still engaged in kind of hand-to-hand fight to a degree. You would be able to see the people you were killing, and you were involved in that. The final picture is an actual photograph of the bomb blast in Hiroshima shortly after 60,000 people had been killed. Now, the people who dropped that bomb weren't 100% sure what it was they were carrying in their airplane, and as they left they could see the explosion coming up. You can see a huge difference there between what's going on in the first picture, where people are really engaged in the fighting and they know who they're fighting and they're kind of in this us and them situation, to a scenario where a bomb's been dropped and then the people have kind of been so remotely removed from it, but it's killed an enormous amount of people and caused an enormous amount of destruction. Now that's an example of a nuclear bomb, one of the WMDs, the weapons of mass destruction that we're looking at today. But the truth is, technology has moved on a lot since then as well. And the nuclear bombs that exist on planet Earth today are outrageously powerful. And if all of them were detonated at the same time, we would obliterate the whole of the human race and the world at the same time, which is a really crazy and shocking thing to think about. The truth is as well, you can do it from even further. You don't even need to now be driving a plane and dropping something from a distance. You can do it with a click of a mouse from miles and miles and miles away. And so 4 different types of WMDs, or weapons of mass destruction, that you need to know about are nuclear weapons, biological warfare, biological weapons, chemical weapons, and radiological weapons as well. Nuclear weapons, as we've already mentioned, will kill hundreds of thousands of people on impact. And then following this, people will die in days and weeks and years to come from the nuclear fallout. The whole area where the bombs were detonated would then be infected for years and years to come. There's stories of the areas in Hiroshima and Nagasaki where babies were born years later with deformities which could be thought back to and related back to that original bomb blast. Biological warfare is about weapons that have in them living diseases and viruses that can infect people and kill them and cause them to suffer. Chemical warfare is non-living toxins. It's things like anthrax, which again can cause a lot of horrible suffering and death to people who are involved or attacked by that. And then radiological warfare, we sometimes might call that like a dirty bomb. And what that is, there's like conventional explosions that go off and in them have got radioactive material. And again, it can kill people, it can make them suffer, but it can also damage the entire area where the bombs were detonated. What I want to do with you today is think about this debate, specifically about nuclear weapons. We're going to build towards now a 12-mark GCSE style question where we think about whether or not it's justifiable for countries to own nuclear weapons. What I've done here is I've already prepared a table I'm going to talk through with you now to think about both sides of the debate. Now, it's worth remembering that in the past, the GCSE exam board have differentiated between countries using nuclear weapons and countries owning nuclear weapons. And it's important that when you read the question, you make that differentiation clear in what you're writing in response. But here's a few thoughts for you just off the bat. So many people would say that it's not justifiable to use or own nuclear weapons, and that's because instantly they kill thousands of people. And on top of that, it's not just a quick death; it can be a long and slow, painful death. And if it's not death, it might be disability or deformity that follows. We also know when you're using a weapon with that's this big and this powerful, it's going to kill civilians. It's going to be pretty impossible to kind of pinpoint a weapon to only use against military targets. That's going to be very, very difficult. It can kill people years and years later. So it's not just civilians who might have been around at the time of the conflict. It could be people years later, which a lot of people have a lot of ethical problems with. As we mentioned, it can cause deformities. It can also really harm the environment. And as you know from our work on stewardship in Christian teaching, the earth is God's creation, and that humans are here as temporary tenants. We're supposed to be looking after it on behalf of God. Nuclear weapons could fall into the hand of terrorists. And again, that's a huge problem in itself, that if terrorists did get a hand on a WMD, the damage that they can inflict on civilians with that could be absolutely catastrophic. Nuclear weapons are incredibly expensive, not just to produce, but also to maintain. Now, we're at a time where in our country, at least, education is really missing out on some vital finances, and so is the National Health Service. And some of the money that we're using to spend on nuclear warfare, some believe should be better invested elsewhere. And finally, you can't really use a nuke proportionately. You'll remember from our work on a just war theory that weapons need to be used proportionately, and it's very difficult to use a weapon of mass destruction proportionately. On the other side, you'll see it's quite a small part of the table, but a really key reason why some Christians do agree with the existence of nukes, and I'm not saying the use of, I'm talking about the existence of, is this idea that it's a deterrent. So if you've got a nuclear weapon in your country, it's far less likely that another country are going to attack you. And there have been no major world wars since World War II, and many people think that's because lots of countries now do have nuclear weapons. And because of just the existence of them, it puts people off fighting because they're there. A nuke could be used to end a war early. Some people have defended the Americans' use of the nuclear bombs, the H-bombs, in World War II, because you could argue that it stopped a very violent and bloody war early. And if those nukes hadn't have been used, Japan might not have surrendered, and the war could have gone on for far longer, and there could have been more deaths overall. That's an incredibly speculative argument, but it is one that people make. And finally, you could say, based on that, that a nuke could be the lesser of two evils. That war is evil and nukes are evil, but if the nuke is going to end the war early and subsequently, even though it causes a lot of death and destruction, cause less death and destruction overall, and you look at the maths of it, then actually, potentially, it could be the lesser of two evils. So we're going to pause here so you can do some questions. Only 3 today, but one's one of the 12 markers. So number 1, describe 2 types of WMD. Number 2, explain some of the effects of using nuclear weapons. And number 3, the big 12 mark I'd like to have a go at. No country should own nuclear weapons. Now, if you haven't done a 12 marker before, this is a great one to start with. You might want to rewind the video a bit and have a look at that table as you plot your answer out. But it's good just to bear in mind again, there's a differentiation here, isn't there? It's about owning nuclear weapons, not about using nuclear weapons. Make that clear in your answer. Okay, time to look at some answers. So 2 types of WMDs you could have talked about there, maybe biological weapons or chemical weapons. And biological weapons are the ones with living organisms in them, with viruses that make your enemy ill and could kill them or make them suffer. And chemical weapons are non-living toxins in them, things like anthrax that could do a similar thing and kill or harm your enemy. Some of the effects of using nuclear weapons would be mass death, mass destruction, destruction to the environment, people born with disabilities years later. And then the Big 12 marker, no country should own nuclear weapons. Well, there's two ways you go with this. You go, one, no, they're evil, and you talk about how they harm people and harm the environment, etc. And on the other hand, you say, well, could they be the lesser of two evils? And by owning them, could they stop more wars occurring? Remember to bring in your religious teaching somewhere in there, so you love your neighbour, you do not kill, you treat others the way you like to be treated, those sort of things, and making sure that you're supporting your answer with those important religious teachings. The extension there was to look at the nuke map. If you Google nuke map, you'll find that, and you can look at the impact that any nuclear weapons could be if they were dropped anywhere near your house. You can put your postcode in and find that out. It's quite interesting. Thank you so much for being here today. That's the end of our lessons on weapons of mass destruction. And just to finally look at that need to know, weapons of mass destruction have the potential to obliterate the human race and planet Earth. Now, whilst no religious people agree with their use, some see their existence as a necessary evil to deter countries from going to war. Catch you next time.